Okay, are we ready? Good. Let's give a cheer to our first contestant, Saul Penn.
Thank you very much. The wind is probably a little too noisy for our listening ease. Ingersoll himself spoke to audiences of about 50,000 in the big hall of Chicago without the advantage of a microphone or loudspeakers or anything. And I assume you could hear a pin drop there. My recitation comes from two speeches by Ingersoll. The first is, what would you substitute for the Bible as a moral guide? And the relevance of that, of course, is that recently here in Washington, we had a bus campaign with slogans posted on the buses. Be good for goodness sake. You don't need God. Well, Ingersoll would certainly have been a big supporter of that slogan campaign. My other speech comes from The Liberty of Man, Woman, and Child, but it's really a review of the story of Napoleon Bonaparte after Ingersoll visited the tomb of Napoleon in Europe on one of his European tours. I hope you'll enjoy that. On the talk. What would you substitute for the Bible as a moral guide? I know that many people regard the Bible as the only moral guide and believe that in that book only can be found the true and perfect standard of morality. The trouble is that the spirit of the Old Testament, its disposition, its temperament is bad, selfish, and cruel. The most fiendish things are commanded, commended, and applauded. On the whole, the Old Testament cannot be considered a moral guide. I admit that there were many good things in the New Testament. And if we take away the dogmas of eternal pain, of infinite revenge, of the atonement, of human sacrifice, of the necessity of shedding blood, if we throw away the doctrine of non-resistance, of loving enemies, the idea that prosperity is the result of wickedness, that poverty is a preparation for paradise, if we throw all these away and take the good, sensible passages applicable to conduct, then we can make a fairly good moral guide. Narrow, but moral. The Bible is not a moral guide. Happiness, including its highest forms, is after all the only good. Everything that produces or secures happiness is good and moral. Everything that destroys or diminishes well-being is immoral. What then is or can be called a moral guide? The shortest possible answer is one word: intelligence. Religions teach the slave virtues. They make inanimate things holy and falsehood sacred. They create artificial crimes. To eat meat on Friday, to enjoy yourself on Sunday, to eat on fast days, to be happy in Lent, to dispute a priest, to ask for evidence, to deny a creed, to express your sincere thought. All these acts are sins and crimes against some God. Only the obedient, the credulous, the cringers, the kneelers, the meek, the unquestioning, the true believers are regarded as moral, as virtuous. It is not enough to be honest, generous, and useful. Not enough to be governed by evidence, by facts. In addition to this, you must believe. These things are the foes of morality. They subvert all natural conceptions of virtue. Again, I say, intelligence is the only moral guide. Now, after visiting the tomb of Napoleon, he came back and he said, a while ago, I stood by the grave of the old Napoleon, a magnificent tomb of gilt and gold, fit almost for a dead deity, and gazed upon the sarcophagus of rare and nameless marble, where rest at last the ashes of that restless man. I leaned over the balustrade and thought about the career of the greatest soldier of the modern world. I saw him walking upon the banks of the Seine, contemplating suicide. I saw him at Toulon. I saw him putting down the mob in the streets of Paris. I saw him at the head of the army of Italy. I saw him crossing the bridge of Lodi with the tricolor in his hand. I saw him conquer the Alps and mingle the eagles of France with the eagles of the crags. I saw him at Marengo, at Ulm and Austerlitz. I saw him in Russia, where the infantry of the snow and the cavalry of the wild beast scattered his legions like winter's withered leaves. I saw him at Leipzig in defeat and disaster, driven by 1,000,000 bayonets back upon Paris, clutched like a wild beast, banished to Elba. I saw him escape and retake an empire by the force of genius. I saw him upon the frightful field of Waterloo, where chance and fate combined to wreck the fortunes of their former king. And I saw him at St. Helena, with his hands crossed behind him, gazing out upon the sad and solemn sea. I thought of the orphans and widows he made, of the tears that had been shed for his glory, and of the only woman who had ever loved him, pushed from his heart by the cold hand of ambition. And I said I would rather have been a French peasant and worn wooden shoes. I would rather have lived in a hut with a vine growing over the door, and the grapes growing purple in the kisses of the autumn sun. I would rather have been that poor peasant with my loving wife by my side, knitting as the day died out of the sky, with my children upon my knees and their arms about me. I would rather have been that man and gone down to the tongueless silence of the dreamless dust than to have been that imperial impersonation of force and murder known as Napoleon the Great.